It started with a huge gathering of people where the girl was about to be tried. The people were very angry and shouted, calling her a sinner and a demoness. They wanted reprisals. The girl herself was sitting on her knees in tattered clothes and realized that everything had led to this outcome. Then a man spoke up and told Amelia that she would be punished for her deed. The girl looked at him pitifully and begged Mr. Cornelius not to be so cruel. However, another man interrupted her and said that the accused Amelia Reynolds for embezzling her taxes, raising drug prices during a serious epidemic, and many other things was charged. It was too hard for the girl to hear all of this, because she hadn't actually done any of the above. So Amelia couldn't stand it and started screaming, saying she was innocent and it was all slander. She knew perfectly well that the true evil was this very Cornelius who was accusing her. Sometime before, when all was still well, a man sat at the dinner table and, striking his plate against the table and knocking over all the food, asked, "Don't they have any meat?" He was very angry and wondered since when this persistent royal meal was so small and cheap. Amelia was very frightened. She turned to Cornelius and told him that every year the taxes were getting higher and higher. Then the girl was still dressed in gorgeous dresses and her hair was beautiful. She said that their people needed something to feed on, cattle, so they didn't have much food on the table now. When Cornelius looked at her with an angry look, he said that in that case they should impose even more taxes. The girl was very worried when she heard about it. She wanted to say something in defense of the people, but she didn't have time. The man got up from the table and said she was talking too much and he himself didn't care about the people, he just didn't want to eat like a beggar in his own house at all. Amelia wanted to object, but realized it would be useless, since he wasn't going to listen to her anyway. Shortly thereafter, another incident occurred when the man returned to his office and saw many different boxes. However, he told the girl that it was too little for you, and asked the aide to have them collect medicines from all over the country. Amelia was worried then. She grabbed his hand and told him that if the royal family monopolized the medicine, people simply wouldn't survive the epidemic. She also said that they were obliged to distribute the medicine equally to all citizens. But Cornelius was fed up with this, and he told her to shut up at last. He said that the lives of the members of the royal country were above the lives of some inferior society, and no one had given her any say at all, so he didn't want her to say anything at all. The girl, hearing this, was indignant, but could say nothing back to him. Then Cornelius pushed her aside and said that there were enough people in their kingdom, and now the usual natural selection would take effect. Some would die and some would survive. He started to walk away and didn't even turn toward the girl. Amelia ran after him. She wanted to stop him, but it was useless. And now, as the girl sat in court, she said in a quiet voice that all this time she herself had been trying to get through to Mr. Cornelius, but he was too stubborn. The king said that as her husband, he believed in the righteousness of her action toward all the people, but she still condemned them all to suffering. He stepped closer to the men and told them it was his fault when he noticed the consequences of her atrocity and that it was too late. He made himself a great sufferer and said that this sin he would bear for the rest of his life. When the little girl who was standing in the crowd heard this, she immediately felt sorry for the king and almost cried. Cornelius, already in turn, drew his great sword and, pointing it toward the crowd, said that for the sake of avenging those they had lost, he would personally give her heavenly punishment. The people, when they heard this, immediately began to support his ideas and shouted in agreement. Then Cornelius walked over to Amelia and grabbed her hair hard, pulling her head up for her to look directly into his eyes. The man said, approaching her, that she had always been a worthless, nagging wife, and so he wanted her to fulfill already her last role as befitted. He asked in a quiet voice that she should die for him. Amelia stared at him in surprise for a while, then realized the truth. The girl now knew that Mr. Cornelius had married her, only to end up making a scapegoat of her at the right moment, and blaming her for everything he could. At that moment, the man rose to his feet and swung his sword at her. Amelia closed her eyes, but it didn't help. The girl at this moment thought of the fact that she had even been prepared from childhood to be a perfect wife for him. She thought their feelings would be mutual, but apparently she had been wrong all this time and didn't really see the problem. Instead of ruling with her, he decided to stop from her forever and never let her near him again. And now Amelia thought only that if she had one small chance to live her life again, she would not hesitate to change that fate. At this moment, her head had already been cut off, and there was a lot of blood on the stand. Soon after, the girl opened her eyes and realized that something was wrong. She was lying in bed, and she was perfectly healthy. That surprised her because she was completely alive. Although she had felt the blade on her neck a second ago, Amelia didn't understand how this was even possible. After all, her head had been chopped off, and even still that place hurt. As she looked around, she realized that this was her room in the manor. She looked around, realizing it was her room, but her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. The voice of a maid was heard, asking the mistress if she could come in. The girl immediately replied that of course she could. When the maid entered the room, she wished her a good morning and suggested that they start getting ready to go out right now. After all, they didn't have much time. Amelia, hearing this, was very surprised and asked what kind of exit, and what it was all about. The maid said that there would be a gala ball on that day in honor of the founding day of the Kingdom of Solarian. She was invited as the guest of honor. Seeing Amelia's surprised face, she asked, "Has the girl forgotten about this?" As she thought about it, she remembered the dress she had worn that day, and all the memories came flooding back to her at once. Amelia jumped up from her bed, and apologizing to the maid for that reaction, asked, "How old is she now anyway?" The maid, hearing this question, was very surprised and asked, "Is there really something wrong? After all, I am now 19 years old, and she doesn't understand how mistress can't remember it at all." At that moment, Amelia went to the maid and took a towel from her to wipe her face. She remembered that her head had been cut off when she was 23, and now the girl understood perfectly well why everything felt so strange, for she had gone back in time after her death, just as she had wanted to. After a little silence, Amelia turned to the maid and asked, "Will Mr. Cornelius be at this ball?" The maid said that of course he would come, since he was a member of the ruling family, and it was rumored that he would even make a very important announcement at the celebration. Amelia pondered this important announcement for a while, and then remembered that in her 19th year, on the day the kingdom was founded, Mr. Cornelius had proposed to her right before everyone's eyes. Simply put, they were not husband and wife at the moment, and this thought pleased the girl very much. Seeing her surprised face, the maid came closer to her and inquired, "Is she feeling well at all?" The girl replied that it was just fine, and suggested to start already getting ready to go out immediately, in order to have time for everything. She turned around and started to walk over to the dressing table with the mirror that stood nearby. The maid was still a little anxious, but said she would do as she wished. When Amelia sat down at the table, the maid began to tidy her hair, while the girl herself was considering her appearance at this moment. She noticed that she really did look younger than her years, which meant that she really had a cherished second chance at a new and good life. Except she knows what kind of dictator you will sit on the throne, and seeing her tragic ending, God took pity on her and gave her a second chance at salvation, which is exactly how Amelia envisioned her fate. She is absolutely certain that this is what happened, and God just took pity on her by giving her this opportunity. She put her head down and thought about the fact that there was no way in this life she was going to let this Cornelius do as he pleased. Almost all day long the girl had been getting ready for this beautiful event, and when it was getting dark outside, she finally drove out. Amelia sat across from her parents and stared out the window, contemplating the various options for getting through this ball. Her most important and initial goal, of course, was to refuse to marry Mr. Cornelius by any means necessary. And in order to put that plan into action, she needed to find another partner for marriage. The girl, thinking about it, waved her head in agreement with herself. She knew that marriages were usually arranged from childhood, and bachelors in high society are either very old and elderly, or those whose families have certain problems. She looked out the window with the bright lights shining in, illuminating the street, and thought that maybe the easiest thing to do would be to just drop everything and leave this country. She could already even think of a few options on where she should run away to, and how to start her life over again. However, after looking at her parents, she realized that not at all. For her escape would have a negative effect on her entire family. And besides, Amelia doesn't want that tragedy to happen again with an epidemic, and people who were absolutely helpless and couldn't even get their medicine. But then, she doesn't know how she would still do the right thing in such a situation. Suddenly, her father turned to her and asked Amelia, "What is she thinking so hard about?" Mother picked him up and asked, "Has something happened to her?" The girl was very surprised that they were even asking about it, and immediately said that not at all, she was fine. She smiled back at them so her parents wouldn't worry anymore. Her mother looked at her spouse and said that since that was the case, she was glad to know it. But after that, she shifted her gaze to her daughter and said that if she ever needed their advice, she could always ask them for help. They would always be there for her. Abundance's father also smiled and said that, of course, because she was their favorite little girl, and they would always help her. When the girl heard those words, she almost cried because of how wonderful her parents were. And she realized that she definitely couldn't just run away and leave them behind. For some time they rode in silence. Then my father said that he had heard that this ball would also be attended by a man who was very important in society. His wife said of this that yes, she too had heard of the very man from the kingdom in Fortilia. Amelia in turn sank back into her thoughts, and unfortunately no ideas had come to her yet. However, she'd by no means marry again to that tyrant Cornelius anyway. Some more time passed from that moment, and they finally arrived at the manor where this beautiful ball was being held. When they got inside, her father and mother left Amelia, saying they would see each other later. The girl didn't mind. She had to think about what to do. She walked a little farther and saw some lovely ladies heading that way as well. She curtsied, greeting them and wishing them a good evening. The girls also curtsied, and when they saw Mrs. Amelia, they were very happy. They came closer to her to talk to her, and when they took a closer look at her, they were delighted, for the girl was wearing a beautiful dress. Amelia averted her gaze, and for she was very embarrassed, but still thanked them for such praise. She also said that it is, after all, a very special day, and she had specially prepared a dress for the occasion. The red-haired girl who was standing beside her directly glowed with happiness, and said that she was sure that His Highness would be enchanted by her appearance. Amelia smiled and thanked her for it. Then another lady spoke up, saying that she had heard that the king of a neighboring country himself had come to this reception. Her friend also said that she's heard about it too. He's even being labeled by everyone as the emotionless king of Fortilia. When Amelia heard about it, she asked why exactly the unfeeling king, since she hadn't heard of it before. The red-haired girl said that he was called that by everyone because he was a very challenging young man. And if she is still unlucky enough to meet him in a bad mood, he immediately gets rid of them, since he is also, coincidentally, a great swordmaster. And some talk about how he has managed to take more than one life at such a young age. Amelia smiled and said it was all idle gossip with no proof. The girl doesn't even believe that such a person could even exist, and people just want to exaggerate various information. At that time, the red-haired girl suddenly shouted at Mistress and told her not to take it so lightly, because some talk about him being a massive man and his facial features being similar to even lion-like, and if she catches his eye, you can assume she's no longer alive. Amelia thought about the kingdom of Fortilia at this moment, and realized that it was far more developed and powerful than her kingdom of Solarian. Their king is a young man named Luke, and she has never met him in her past life. However, the girl knows for a fact that he is the same age as Mr. Cornelius, and because of his notoriety, he was just as much shunned by everyone. Unlike Cornelius, who became king and did whatever he wanted, Mr. Luke only developed his country, bringing it to prosperity. And at that moment, the girl suddenly had a brilliant idea of how she could get out of her situation. Amelia thought about the fact that if she married the king of a neighboring kingdom, not even Cornelius could stop her. This marriage to Mr. Luke can keep her from a horrible future, and it's exactly her chance to realize everything she has in mind. Amelia realized that she must be sure to become Luke's wife at any cost, and she was willing to go even to extreme measures. Soon the ball was underway, and the young girls were dancing with their young men. Some were just standing around talking, some were drinking. Amelia stood behind everyone and drank her red wine, thinking over the plan that had matured in her head. The girl didn't know what to do if Cornelius tried to stop her by blackmailing her with her parents' lives. Or he could do even crazier things, namely not wanting to let her go, accuse her of some crime and send her straight to execution. But Amelia knew she had absolutely no other choice, so she must at least try. The girl is going to protect herself, her family, and won't let Cornelius do anything to protect the country as well. And even if those rumors about Luke are true, that he really is an unfeeling king, it would still be better than staying with that autocrat on the throne. Then suddenly her musings were interrupted by the voice of the organizer of the event, who addressed the ladies and gentlemen, telling them to welcome the royal family of the country of Solarian. Then people began to enter the hall. In front of everyone was His Majesty Cornelius, and the ladies who saw him began to whisper, saying that he looked excellent. Amelia didn't even look in his direction. She realized that Mr. Luke must be at the ball too, and now was the time to find him. She set her glass on the table and ran through the crowd. She realized that since he was the king, he would stand out from the rest of the guests, if only by his clothes. Amelia must find him before Cornelius himself finds her in order to avoid making a terrible mistake, namely proposing marriage to him. But soon as she was walking past the crowd, she suddenly looked away and saw their gazes meet with Cornelius's. The girl realized that this was totally uncool, so she turned around and started running in the other direction, so he wouldn't suspect anything. Cornelius himself was very surprised when he saw her. He didn't expect her to run away from him. Amelia ran out onto the terrace at that moment. She didn't want to meet him, so she decided to just wait it out. She breathed a sigh of relief, thinking about the fact that it had been perfectly close, but she hadn't gotten caught, thank God. But when she looked up, she saw that she was not alone on the terrace. There was a dark-haired man in a uniform not far from her. The guy turned his head to the side and started looking at the girl intently. She didn't take her eyes off him either. Amelia realized that this young man might be the king she was looking for. The girl was silent for a while, and then wished him good evening. In fact, Amelia had never seen this young man before, and assumed he was an aristocrat from the other side. They stared at each other for a while, and then the man asked in a quiet and detached voice if she needed anything from him. The girl, hearing this, was very much surprised. She came closer to him and asked him if he happened to know Mr. Luke Fortilia. The man looked at her in surprise, then wondered why she thought he should be familiar with him. Amelia was a little confused, but said that his clothes didn't match the fashion of this kingdom, so she assumed he must be not from around here. The man was silent for a while, and then, thinking, he said that there was not a single thing he did not know. Amelia was very surprised to hear this and asked if it was really true. She said it so loudly that the stranger looked away from her. Then the girl apologized for her rudeness, but said she should have introduced herself from the beginning. Then she curtsied and said her name. She was about to say that if he knew Mr. Luke, she would like to ask him to give him something to tell him, but she didn't have time to do so, for behind her she saw Mr. Cornelius passing directly in front of the windows, but not looking in their direction. The girl realized that if she didn't hurry right now, she would once again find herself in the horrible future that awaited her with this man. So Amelia got straight to the point and asked if he happened to know where Mr. Luke was now. She put her head down and said she had to meet him right now to ask for his hand in marriage. The man, hearing this, was very surprised. He didn't expect her to say such a thing at all. Amelia knew she had too little time, so she must find him as soon as possible. The girl started to climb over the balcony and apologized that they were ending the conversation like this, but she said she had to hurry. She had one more very urgent thing to do. The man just stood watching her for a while, not understanding what she was even doing or why. At this very time, Amelia had already returned to the celebration and was passing as stealthily as possible through the crowd. As she was about to go out the door, however, someone grabbed her arm. She turned around and saw Cornelius. The man smiled and said that he had already searched for her. Amelia sighed heavily, realizing that he had found her after all, and she couldn't hide. Cornelius kept smiling and said he had a present for her. He thought that the newlyweds would not be comfortable living in the palace, so he decided to buy a villa for them and her. Amelia, on hearing this, asked in surprise what other villa, and the latter said it was in the Frisia Hills. The girl, on hearing this information, froze in place, for she remembered this villa well. However, the girl had not the fondest memories with her, because Cornelius forced the elderly couple to close them in the store on the hill, and built a house on the spot. Cornelius, seeing her surprised face, put his arm around her and said he had made the gift especially for her, and wondered if she wasn't pleased. Amelia thought at this moment that to this man who is a monster, people are just ordinary bugs, that he is ready to crush ignorantly if they interfere with his elegant life. And right now, what she doesn't want more than anything is for this monster to rule their country and make some very important decisions. The girl turned around and started to head in the other direction away from the man. saying that she wanted to celebrate over a glass of champagne. She also added that she would bring it to them. She thought to herself at that moment that right now she must find Mr. Luke as soon as possible, before Cornelius announced their marriage. When the girl approached the waiter, she asked if he could give her 2 glasses of champagne. The man immediately smiled at her and, handing her glasses, told her that he would do whatever she wished. But at that moment, when Amelia picked up the glass, she couldn't hold it and dropped it. The champagne fell to the floor and shattered, spilling onto the ground. The waiter became overwhelmed and immediately apologized to the lady and asked if she had hurt herself. The girl just smiled and waved her hand, saying that she was all right and it wasn't his fault. She was the one who couldn't hold the glass. At that moment, Cornelius came up to them and looked at them in surprise and asked what they had happened. Amelia looked at him and said that unfortunately she had soiled her dress, and also asked if he would allow her to go away for a while. When Cornelius shifted his gaze a little lower, he saw that indeed, not with the girl's dress, was something yellow. He said that of course she could be off, and also inquired if she would allow him to escort her. But the girl said not at all. She could not waste his precious time, for Mr. Cornelius must be so busy. Amelia gave him one last smile and said that she had arrived at the palace with her maid, so she would help her. Cornelius didn't trust her a bit, but still, he had no choice, so he turned around and started to walk away back to his guests. Soon the girl came into the room with her maid, who carefully began to wipe her dress. Amelia sat and thought about the fact that she had managed to carve out some time for herself, and now was the perfect moment for her to continue her search. Soon the maid rose from the floor and told mistress that she was finished. She thanked her and said that she would return to the ballroom. When the girl went toward the ballroom, she saw a man standing nearby. She had seen him on the terrace before. Amelia stepped closer to him and, after scrutinizing his face, said it was him again. The man bowed at that moment and asked if she had finished her urgent business. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about, but then she remembered and said yes. He then asked if her urgent business had anything to do with her intentionally dropping that champagne glass. The girl, when she heard that, froze on the spot. She hadn't even realized he'd been watching her the whole time. And to top it all off, he'd even noticed that she dropped the glass completely unintentionally, though no one else had even suspected it. The man inquired, looking her straight in the eye, what she was doing all this for, and why she wanted to contact Mr. Luke. He also wondered if the girl knew what the rumors about him were in general, and wouldn't it be better for her to stay out of the jaws of this enraged beast. Amelia was silent for a while, trying to find the right words. Then she said she was well aware of the rumors about him. Still, by all means, she wants very much to meet him and talk things over. When the man heard this, he was very surprised, and for a while just looked at the girl. After that, he smiled and said that since she was serious, he could go with him. Amelia was surprised to hear this and wondered where he wanted to take her. But soon the man took her straight to the ballroom, where all the couples were dancing. The girl didn't understand what was happening and why he was pulling her hand so fast. And at that moment, people also started to turn around and stare at her in surprise. Men and women did not understand why Mrs. Amelia was near this man, and it alarmed them all. The girl in turn turned to the man and irritably wondered what he was even doing. However, the stranger didn't say anything to her. He just kept walking on, and when they were in the middle of the ballroom, he finally stopped. The musicians stopped playing music and everyone looked at the man with Amelia in surprise. When the guy took a few steps forward and said his name was Luke Fortilia, and he wanted to make an official announcement. The man looked very serious, and glancing at the girl said he wished to marry Amelia Reynolds. After that, Luke came closer to her and, embracing her, remained silent for a while. The girl was incredibly surprised to hear this information. All the guests present gasped in shock in an instant, for they had not expected that he could make such a statement. Amelia in turn looked at the man who stood beside her, and wondered in a trembling voice if he was really His Highness Luke. The man said that yes, he was the one she so desperately wanted to marry, and then, smiling, wondered, has she changed her mind about it yet? Amelia stared at him in surprise the whole time and couldn't say a word. Then the guy turned away and said that since that was the case, he could take it back. The girl, hearing this, realized that he was completely serious, and replied that he wasn't at all. She was still in shock, but said she gladly accepted his offer. Then was continued, and at the end of the day, when Amelia and her parent finally returned to their home, they had a very serious conversation. The father looked at the girl and asked that she bother to explain that this had happened at the event, and also inquired, since when did she and His Highness Luke have any relationship? Amelia, who had already changed into her pajamas and sat silently with her head down, not knowing what to say to this, for her father was simply furious. The man sighed heavily and asked that she just not say it was all serious, but then he said that he might not have much of a clue what exactly was going on right now. He was silent for a while. Then he took his daughter's hand, telling her that she could do whatever she wanted and whatever she thought was right. Amelia, when she heard this, was very surprised and wondered, is he not angry with her? And what would happen in such a case to their position at court? When Mother smiled and said that she could certainly not worry about them, for it was her life, it was up to her to decide with whom she would share it. The girl was really very surprised, and it touched her, and then she was glad that her parents understood her, and even more so supported her in her decision. At that moment, however, a butler knocked at their room. He apologized for interrupting their conversation, but said that Mrs. Opale had received a letter from the king of Fartalea. Then the butler handed her an envelope, and the mother and father inquired, "What does he write?" As the girl read it, it said that Luke was returning to the kingdom tomorrow morning, and would pick her up exactly 1 month later. Amelia, after reading about it, was very surprised after all. A month was a very long time, because in that period of time, His Highness Cornelius could do anything because of his anger. In a trembling voice, the girl turned to her mother and father and said that tomorrow His Majesty would lie down to go to his native land, and she wished to go with him. Amelia started to leave the room and said that her decision was final, so she went to pack her things. When the girl got to her room, she packed her suitcase, and after packing, she was ready. Going down the stairs, Amelia realized that she had no time to lose, and she must go to His Majesty right now. However, a guest soon arrived. The man apologized for the intrusion, but said he was sent by Crown Prince Cornelius, and had come to take Lady Amelia back to the castle. When the girl heard this, yes, straightforwardly stopped on the spot. She did not expect Mr. Cornelius's soldiers to have already arrived. The mother in turn said that she was sorry, but that she would not give up her daughter at this hour, for Amelia was very tired for the day, and also asked if they could not wait until the next morning. Amelia at this point was incredibly grateful to her mother, who insisted on doing her own thing. After what had happened, the knight did leave, and her father escorted the girl to another entrance so they wouldn't cross paths. He told the girl to be sure to be careful and not let His Highness's soldiers notice her in any way. Amelia, with tears in her eyes, hugged her father and thanked him for all this. The man in turn said that his sweet girl should take care of herself. The girl said in a trembling voice that she would be sure to take care of herself, and thanked him again. In fact, Amelia wasn't going to let Cornelius ruin her life again. She's going to avoid a sad fate, and to do that, she's going to a completely different place she's never been before. At this very time, Cornelius was at his castle with his subjects and friends. He sat drinking wine, and when the knights came to him, he inquired in a cold voice where Amelia was. One of the guards knelt down and said in a trembling voice, due to fear that the lady was very tired during the reception, her mother insisted that they pick her up the next morning. When Cornelius heard this, he got even more angry. He drew his sword and wondered, did the boy really believe them, and if so, is he an idiot? His Highness put his blade straight to the knight's throat. The knight was very frightened and began to apologize. The fellow straightforwardly begged His Highness not to be angry, and also said that he would bring her to the manor immediately early tomorrow morning. But the guard did not have time to finish the last sentence, for he lost his hand to Cornelius's anger. The friends who were present in the room immediately turned away. They were not very pleased to see all this. Cornelius turned away from the guy who was screaming in pain and said he was just required to bring her in. Drawing out each word slowly, he said the guy should still be grateful to him for losing his arm and not his life. Shortly afterward, the man returned to his office and thought of Amelia. He considered her his fiancée. He thought about how the girl must be so naive to think he would let her marry that man. Cornelius got angry and clenched his teeth together, thinking that he would definitely use everything he had, but he would definitely give it back to her. He's also going to make her regret humiliating him right in front of the entire duchy. The man was incredibly angry with Amelia. At this very time, The girl had already managed to arrive at the train station where she was supposed to leave. Amelia looked around, trying to find him. The girl knew there was no turning back, and she must go to the kingdom with him, and soon she saw the back of his head in the crowd. Then Amelia immediately ran to him and called his name so that Luke would respond and notice her. The man who heard someone calling him looked back in surprise, and was even more surprised to see the girl. He turned to Lady Amelia and wondered what she was doing in this place in the first place. The girl stepped closer to him and lowered her head to apologize, but she said that when she saw his letter, she just couldn't sit still. Amelia said that waiting a whole month she just couldn't bear this separation with him, so she decided to go now. Luke was silent for a while, then said that even while still at the ball, she was diligently trying to avoid the crown prince of the kingdom of Solarian, and he wondered if she was so unwilling to stay in this place, and that was why she had come to him to leave that day. Amelia lowered her head and didn't know what to do. If she told him she knew her future, he wouldn't believe her, and even if he did, he wouldn't care about her life and safety. In fact, it was rumored that if you anger the king of Farthilia, he would run away with your life, but she didn't know how to explain to him any other way about her desire to leave so soon with him. So for a while the girl just stood there silent, a sad expression on her face. Luke, when he noticed this, sighed heavily and said that he understood and wouldn't bother her with various questions. When Amelia heard this, she was really surprised. The man held out his hand to her and said that she had a strong desire to go with him, so be it. It had been quite some time since they had finally arrived at Luke's estate. His servants immediately lined up in 2 columns and bowed, greeting His Highness. Soon a butler came up to him and began examining Amelia in surprise, and then asked His Highness who the lady was. Luke didn't understand why they were so surprised, but he said she was his fiancée. The butler, for his part, couldn't even say a word. They went on, and the gentleman asked that they prepare a separate room for her. The man immediately realized that he had to fulfill his duties, so he replied that he would do everything. They continued walking through the manor, and all the maids who stood outside the rooms whispered as soon as they saw them together. The rumor reached them very quickly that this lady was indeed his fiancée, and it surprised them incredibly much. The other men, who had various duties in the house, did not understand the reason for His Majesty's choice. Luke soon brought the girl to his office, as her room was not ready yet. He sat down to deal with various papers, while Amelia sat on the couch nearby. The girl was silent the whole time, but then she sighed heavily because it was nice to finally get away from all those gazes of the workers, for that little gate was a pomposity. She realized that she was clearly not expected in this place. Soon the butler came in, and addressing His Majesty, said that he had prepared a room for the lady. Luke waved his head and asked that, in that case, he would escort her to her chambers. He also asked that the boy plan an engagement to Lady Amelia. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised. She didn't say a word. After that, the man turned to her as well. Luke said he knew it might be rude to ask that right off the bat, and so he trusts her completely to handle the engagement, so she can take almost all the decisions on her own. And he also said that he would send a royal merchant to her very soon, and she could buy from him all the essentials for a girl. It could be dresses, jewelry, shoes, and things like that. Amelia, when she heard this, was very pleased. She loved doing things like this, so she thanked him for the opportunity. And so it had been a whole month since then, as she was getting used to life in a new kingdom with completely different rules. Although it was not easy, however, the day eventually came when His Majesty would announce their alliance to everyone. When evening came, a multitude of people gathered at the Lord's castle so that he could announce the news in front of everyone. One of the house staff turned to the guests and asked that they welcome His Royal Highness along with Mrs. Amelia Reynolds. And at the same second, Luke walked into the ballroom with his girlfriend. They looked incredibly beautiful and gorgeous, as befitted their couple. Amelia, in turn, eyed the guests warily, who all the while were turning around, whispering, and some even laughing behind her back. She knew very well that this ball was her first test as the bride of the King of Fartilia, and she must in no way fall flat on her face. Soon Luke and the girl approached some man, and Amelia curtsied, saying she was very pleased to meet them, and introduced herself. The man smiled and asked if she was the Lady Amelia. It was surprising, for he had heard so much about her. The man, seeing her surprised face, asked her not to think wrongly of him. However, their king did not want to hear about marriage all this time, and no one could even think that he would bring a bride from a neighboring country just by attending a ball. Luke, for his part, frowned and said that the man was talking about something a lot. He really didn't feel good about broaching the subject. Then the man, laughing nervously, apologized and told His Highness that he had not meant to inconvenience him. Soon after, the men, along with Amelia, approached some more guests to greet them and talk a bit. And soon, Luke led the girl to a lady. He told Lady Amelia that he wanted to introduce her to the Marquis Annette. Olivia Annette told the girl that she was incredibly excited to finally meet her, and also introduced herself properly. The woman also said that it was a great honor to meet Lady Amelia herself. The girl, in turn, smiled and replied that she too was delighted to meet the Marquis. Amelia herself at this point began to scrutinize her appearance, and noticed that she was incredibly beautiful. Yes, and in addition to everything, the woman is also very kind, and in principle, all the people who were present at the ball, very polite and sensitive to the girl. A little later, the orchestra finally played, signifying that the dancing was beginning, and the young men began to ask their ladies to dance. Olivia, when she heard the music, smiled and said that it must be that time for the first dance. She curtsied, apologized, and said her husband was already waiting for her, and let them enjoy the evening. Olivia then said goodbye to His Highness and Lady Amelia. When the man was alone with his bride, he was even embarrassed by the whole thing, because he realized that they would have to dance. The man held out his hand to her and smiled lightly, saying that he thought they should follow the other's lead and start dancing as well. Amelia, when she heard this, was very surprised. She asked him if he really wanted to. Amelia was very surprised when Amelia heard this, and asked if he really wanted to dance with her. The girl immediately said not at all, and that wasn't the point. She just wasn't that good at all at dancing. Luke smiled then and asked if she would let him lead in that case. Then they drew closer to each other, and their beautiful dance began. Amelia noticed after a few minutes of their spinning that His Highness was a very good dancer, and she was very relaxed and fun for such a long time, especially after her past life. The second moment came, and some time passed. The music stopped playing, became more rhythmic, so the couple stopped. A young girl suddenly approached Luke and Amelia. She greeted His Highness and wished them a good evening. When she saw the girl beside him, she asked if she was Amelia. The girl smiled through all her teeth and said their dance was simply inimitable. Luke realized the need for an introduction and told his bride that this was Layla Kranz, the Baron's daughter. Amelia bowed and said that she was pleased to meet Lady Layla, and gave her name. Layla continued to smile and told the girl that she would be incredibly happy if she was allowed to eventually become friends with her. But at that moment, a man approached Luke and asked if he could excuse him for a moment. His Highness said of course, and also apologized to the ladies, saying that he would be right back. Amelia turned around in surprise, but then she saw that he was already leaving, so she didn't even have time to say anything. When Luke had moved far enough away, Layla suddenly snorted and said that there was no way she could even think of what kind of woman Mr. Luke was attracted to anymore. But she looked up arrogantly and said that there was nothing special about her. Amelia stared at the girl in surprise, not understanding what had changed, since she had been very friendly not so long ago. Layla came closer to her and grabbed her by the shoulders, saying that she had come from nowhere. So now she thought she would be welcomed with open arms, respected and listened to. The girl steps on Amelia's dress with her heel, tearing it, and says that Mr. Luke's bride will be her and no one else. She's not going to let some foreigner take it for herself, so Layla wants the girl to remember that. Amelia, hearing all this, was incredibly surprised. She hadn't expected Layla to be such an approachable girl, but she couldn't say anything in her defense. Soon afterward, when the ball was over, they returned to the manor, and the butler came to Luke at once, telling His Highness that Lady Amelia had eaten nothing at the ball. He also said that the maids were very concerned about it and would like to serve her something, but did not know what she preferred. When Luke heard about it, he was very surprised and said that in that case, he could ask the girl herself about it. The butler in that case said it would be as he wished, but still Mrs. Amelia is a very kind lady. Luke was silent for a while. Then the butler continued, saying that she wasn't even shy about helping the servants, nor did she ever reprimand them for any accidental missteps. And maybe he doesn't think he should as a butler talk about it, but she's still the exact opposite of Lady Layla, who is a completely cruel woman. Luke sighed heavily and looked away to say that he was right after all, and asked that the man tell Lady Amelia that she would be eating alone. The butler, hearing this, was very surprised, and then he began to shout, asking the gentleman how he could leave such a lovely lady alone. But the man said nothing to this. He only looked sternly at his servant and said that if that was all he had to say, then he could leave already. The butler said that was all, and left. When he was alone, Luke went to the window and thought about the whole situation. It was already completely dark outside, and he thought about the fact that if getting close to her meant revealing all the cards to each other. The next morning, Amelia was all packed and sitting in her office sipping her morning tea. She thought back to what had happened the previous evening and noticed that Lady Layla had been surrounded by an entourage of her friends that time. And with these girls, Amelie will have to cross paths in various situations. However, she knew that there was absolutely no point in her worrying about what they said. She just had to do the best she could. Amelia left the table and told the maid that she wished to meet His Majesty and asked if she could accompany her to him. The maid was very surprised and said in a trembling voice that His Majesty was probably busy with his official duties right now, so she didn't think it was worth bothering him. Amelia came close to her and, taking her hands gently in hers, said that she was asking for her very much, for she had a very important matter to discuss with him. And so, when the maid heard these words, she said that she would do so at once, and asked that the mistress follow her. Amelia smiled gently at her and thanked the maid for being so gracious. Soon they came to the office where Luke was sitting behind various papers, and when they knocked, the man said they could come in. When they entered, the maid bowed at once, and turning to His Majesty begged for his distraction. The man looked up and saw Amelia, and was very surprised. He immediately asked what he could do to help her. The girl came closer to him and told him that she had a favor to ask of him, and asked that he hire her a teacher. When Luke heard that, he wondered what she suddenly needed him for. He really didn't understand it. Amelia said in a confident voice that as his future wife, he should receive a decent royal education in order not to let down the royal family. Luke said he was already aware that she was well educated in her homeland, and didn't consider a teacher on him to be particularly necessary in such a case. However, still, if she wanted it so badly, he could arrange it for her. When Amelia heard this, a straight face glowed with happiness, and she thanked him. After that, the girl bowed and went to their library. She began to walk between the rows and looked for different books. The girl realized that until she had various teachers, she should learn everything she could about royal farthing herself. So she typed up various informational books and gave them to the maid to help her carry. In fact, Amelia even began to wonder what kind of person her new teacher would be. She really wished he was like Mrs. Agneth, whom they had met at the ball. Immediately afterward, Amelia diligently began to study various materials. She took notes and read books day and night, and so a few days have passed since then, and Amelia has finally found a worthy teacher. A lady came to the girl in the morning, telling her that she would be her mentor from this day forward. But Amelia already knew the man well. However, the girl introduced herself anyway. She said her name was Olivia, an oppression, and she was glad to meet her in good health again. When the girl saw her, she was overjoyed. She told her mistress that she had never dreamed that she would be her mentor, but she was very happy and thanked her. After that, they went to a special room where Olivia tutored Amelia in various information, math, and geography. And one day Olivia said that Mrs. Amelia is full of energy, and she has made good progress in all this time. However, it's only been a little while, and it surprises her actually. Amelia smiled back at her and said that it was all thanks to her instruction. But then her teacher suddenly became serious and said that it was necessary to take breaks in any work, so she suggested that they take a short break. After all, they had been practicing for quite a while. Of course, the girl did not object, and soon the maid brought tea for them along with various sweets. Olivia started talking to her. She wondered if the lady had never been outside the castle since she'd arrived in the country. Amelia said that this is unfortunately true. However, in order to learn more about this country, she wants to visit different parts of it, to go to so many places, because she is fascinated by it. Then the teacher said that she advised her to abstain for a while, When the girl heard this, she was very surprised and asked why she thought so. Olivia said that there was a new disease epidemic raging in the cities right now, and no cure for it had yet been found, so it was very dangerous out there. When Amelia heard this, she immediately thought of the epidemic that had claimed many innocent lives. She had faced its consequences in her past destiny as well. But at that moment, she suddenly remembered and thought that if this was really the same epidemic as that time, she knew a cure that could defeat it. The girl tried to remember what the main ingredient of that very medicine was. After all, this information was lost somewhere in the depths of her memory. But at that moment, the girl remembered the words of Cornelius, who had picked a blue flower and said that it was the basis of the medicine for this terrible affliction. He had said these words in his past life, but of course he did not give the medicine to those who were suffering. Amelia was immediately encouraged when she remembered the blue flower, which was the main ingredient for the cure.